Dr. Don Lynch here. We refer back to a phrase in the Old Testament when the tribes of Israel were receiving a farewell prophetic patriarchal word in which the sons of Issachar were identified as those who would have an awareness of the times. And of course, this alerts prophetic people, and it certainly should, because it obviously identifies a group of people, or the possibility that a group of people exist who have awareness, specific awareness of the times. Now, in the biblical sense, whether literally or metaphorically, the people lived in an agricultural season, or a calendar dominated by agricultural changes and seasons. And so Jesus, of course, solidified that concept by the metaphoric or the parable of referring to seasons as a way of understanding the kingdom. Or in other words, that's how things work in the spirit. Because we not only have natural seasons, but we have spiritual seasons. And he said, now the Father is the one who has the authority in times and seasons. So there's a shift that can come in times. And so that's why we say new era. And there's a shift that comes in seasons, which are the cycles or the patterns that have held true from the creation. That God created a natural cycle of things which affect plant life and all other life in his creation. But there's rhythms in creation that were established by the Creator. Now, I don't want to become mystical about that, because there's no need to. Mystical would assume there was something hidden that needs to be revealed, where the prophecy seems to point to an awareness of something that is obvious to a certain group of people. Not that it's hidden as much as it's right there in front of our face, like an almanac. And we don't use the almanac very much now in current society because we don't think agricultural seasons. You might think about the four seasons in terms of winter, spring, summer, autumn, or whatever order you wish to refer. Spring being the beginning, and autumn being an ending, but winter being a pause in between. Parts of the world don't really experience these seasons, but the agricultural certainly looks to the almanac. And so let me remind you, there were people who in the past would look to the almanac to know when to plant their potatoes, when to spade their garden, when to plant the seeds for their tomatoes. In other words, the almanac had information written by people who had an awareness of the times, looking at the cycles of the moon, I suppose. I don't know. But we do know that in the spirit, there are those who have an awareness of times and seasons. Seasons being the cyclical aspects set in place, but the change of time is when a new era comes, and then we have a reset. That reset resets the seasons, the cycles. And until the seasons began to cycle, only the people with the awareness that a new time has come recognize. Because we are waiting for a whole season to pass before we're like aware, whoa, That was a season, but it wasn't like that season in previous time. This is a new time, not just a new season. Now, we have been announcing that. In other words, what we call the Sons of Issachar, who have an awareness of spiritual timing. We have been announcing that there is a new era and a new reformation that will be available now because of a new era, which will also reset the cyclical aspects of spiritual seasons. And we need to have a fuller understanding of this, else our rhythms may not match the rhythms that the Father has set. We'll think he's behind when he's not. We'll think he's rushing when he's not. In other words, if we don't recognize the time, we won't be able to anticipate the seasons, even though they will remain cyclical. There will be cycles. There are certain seasons, and they don't go away because they're part of creation. But in certain times, they're definitely different. Not so dramatically as the antediluvian, where the world before Noah's flood, when people lived to be nearly 1,000 years old. That was definitely a different time, and rapid in different seasons. That rapid sense of time passing seems that it was much slower. That perhaps what took a long time in the days of Methuselah and Enoch are not the same rhythms of natural life that we experience now. So we're looking at a world shifted by Noah's flood as we look at some aspects of history. Then we're looking at a world shifted by the resurrection when we look at other aspects of history. We are spiritually, however, looking at some shifts that started 500 years ago with the Reformation that are coming into, bringing us into a new time, a new era, and the seasons will remain, but there'll be a different rhythm to the way God accomplishes things. So right now, here we are in 2020, and this is April 11. Tomorrow is Resurrection Sunday, celebrated Resurrection Sunday tomorrow. I want you to think that the rhythms of your life have been shifted. Now, I know that April 11, 2020, some of you are going to immediately assume I'm saying, oh, a virus called COVID-19, the China virus, Wuhan virus, has now changed our lives. No, don't ever say that. It's true that it happened. And it's true that the response or reaction to it will be historic and a marker we'll look back to. But the reality is we need to look at spiritual rhythms more than the natural causes or the storm that was produced by a wind. If you go back to why there was a storm, there was a spiritual reason. So if you're a spiritual person, you're saying, what is the spiritual cause, which it wasn't God who caused the Wuhan virus, then how does a spiritual cause, what is the spiritual cause attempting to do, since we're in a new era in the 2020s, beginning of the 2020s, and a new rhythm? Well, the Father set the new time, a new season, and an enemy has come to distract us and get us out of the rhythms that are, I start to say, natural or are consistent with this new era in the Spirit, this new era of kingdom. We are going to see the restoration of kingdom into ecclesia. We're going to see the restoration of ecclesia in kingdom. You know, you say church. See, what happened was we took church out of kingdom and basically just told Jesus to, go to heaven and shut up. And we ignored his promise in the Great Commission, I'll be with you, I'll be involved with you until the time that you're doing the Great Commission reaches ultimate. Because at the time, the word for time there is age, or a measurable aspect of time, which we're still in. We're still in Great Commission time. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the same kind of historic shift that came 500 years ago with the Reformation. We're now 500 years later looking at a new era and a new Reformation. And what we're looking at will shift the rhythms. The rhythms are the seasons, or how we have spring, summer, fall, and winter in a spiritual sense has been shifted. So the enemy came in at the beginning and made his attempt. He's attempting to establish his own time, his own rhythms. But Sons of Issachar know that he doesn't have the right to do that, nor the authority, but only if he can deceive and distract people into accepting his rhythms will we then begin to get off rhythm with the Father. We'll begin to miss rhythms that are set by the Father. So we need to hear from Sons of Issachar, from people who can say, now listen, new era's here, new season rhythm, a rhythm of the seasons has come. And you need a new almanac, as it were, to know when to plow, plant, weed, latter rain, former rain, latter rain, and know when to harvest. And in fact, we have a prophecy from Amos that there'll come a time when the rhythms will shift so much that those who are plowing and planting will be in the fields with the same time as those who are harvesting. And we always see that as acceleration, but what we need to look at is that in a new era, we have the same seasons, but the rhythms of the seasons may be so radically shifted that we may have some autumn and spring, some summer and winter going on at the same time. In terms of the spiritual climates or atmospheres or the ways in which things function, in the midst of the greatest spring that has occurred in kingdom history since Reformation, the enemy came with a spiritual winter called Wuhan virus, or more importantly, and much more powerfully than the virus, pandemic fear and terror, which then shifted the rhythms of the economy of this world in such a powerful way that what the Father's rhythms would call priority, the enemy is saying, no, here's a different priority. So in other words, when springtime comes, any farmer knows, I have a priority. I need to get out in the fields, I need to plow, because there'll be a time. I don't know, growing up agricultural setting, I remember my father saying, we've had so much rain, the farmers couldn't get in the fields to plow or plant, and now they're going to be putting the crops in late. And in Indiana, we used to say, when they planted the corn, it'll grow. If it's planted already, be knee high as your knee high on the 4th of July. My dad used to say that so many times, and often it was true. Because Rush County, Indiana, the cornfields, if they could be planted according to almanac, we'd have, the corn would come up and we'd have knee high by the 4th of July. But if there was a different atmospheric condition in which the rains came, it was too muddy, and the farmers couldn't plow, and then they couldn't plant, then they couldn't, you see, It changed the rhythm. It extended the winter even though it was spring. Listen carefully. The enemy is working to extend winter even though it's spring. And what's happening is we are buying into the rhythms and distractions of the enemy. So we have reset our priorities to the enemy's rhythms instead of the rhythms of the Father. Time to shift back. Shake yourself and say, right now, resurrection's here. I am shifting back from the distraction of Wuhan virus to resurrection, life, and power. Paul said, among all my priorities, I want to know Jesus. I want to know him, to get to know him so well by experiencing his presence and the power of his resurrection. And literally what Paul's saying is, I want knowing him and the power of his resurrection to be the norm of my life so that it sets normal. It sets priority of my life. How I respond in every season, every time, is set by, I know Jesus and I know the power of his resurrection. Something changed history, ladies and gentlemen, much more than anything hell has ever done. It's called the cross and resurrection and ascension of Jesus. The cross, resurrection, and ascension authority of Jesus changed history more than any other event since creation, in the sense that before creation, the cross, the resurrection, and ascension were already a part of history. Not that they happened before, that's an impossibility and illogical and silly to say, but that they occurred in the time and seasons of the Father. And the shift in the seasons of the kingdom came, its greatest shift came with Jesus. Before that, David. Jesus shifted kingdom because he reset kingdom to spirit first, and he shifted the priorities. And the atmospheres are spiritual indicators. So the enemy comes in, as he did with the storm, as Jesus was on the 2 times while they were on the Sea of Galilee. And the storm, it was the wind or the spiritual condition which disrupted and distracted. But Jesus remained on the rhythms of the Father. He slept. It's like it's time to, hey, it's dark, go to sleep. Or he walked on the water, establishing the priority of his Father, because he had been with his Father praying, and he walked on water, and then in other words, he stepped into the storm, and he said to the storm, and he said to Simon Peter, the storm does not set the priorities. Do not allow the enemy to move you off of God's rhythms and onto his own. This is not winter, in other words. This is not summer. This is, whatever the virus says, it doesn't tell us what time it is. It doesn't tell us what season we're in. The Father does. And so I am declaring that we are in the time of plowing and reaping, the time and rhythm in which evangels, intercessors and warriors who are plowing the ground, that is, the hardened ground is being broken up. That's the aspect of awakening that we need, so that the planters, that's the preachers, the teachers, the evangelists, the announcers, the prophets speaking into that, are fully available, that the seeds now sown are not going to be, not going to hit the hardened ground, the fallow ground, the hardened ground of winter, but are going to be received by soils that are prepared, not shallow soils, and not soils with existing root systems to choke the word so it doesn't become fruitful, but rather that the plows will go deep, will turn the soil over powerfully, the disking and all the processes that are necessary for the preparation will be so intense. In other words, we'll recognize, no hesitation. Recognize, no, Wuhan virus doesn't tell us what to do. Father does. Well, this is not a good time to plow. No, this is an excellent time to plow. Well, this is not a good time to plant. No, this is an excellent time to sow seed. Well, this is not a good time. You're talking about the rhythms of Wuhan, the rhythms of the enemy of Jesus. You're not talking about the seasons of the Father. And so we're going to reset them. And that's the purpose, you see, of godly leaders, to say, hey, you know what time it is? I'm a son of Issachar. You think that Wuhan is setting the clocks and priorities. I'm telling you, here's what the Father's doing. You need to be doing what you see Father doing and saying what you hear Father saying, because He's the one, Father's the one, who determines the time. And now some voices are going to begin to shout and trumpet the times and seasons of the Father. I'm Dr. Don Lynch. Don't just listen to this word, live this word. Yes, you should share it, not because I need to be famous, but because others need to declare the same messaging. What we need to do is more than be hearers of this word, we need to be doers. Take action. Shake yourself out of this lethargy. Of course, May is the month of permission. Stand up and say, Father, may I? And know right now what you're going to ask Father for permission to do. And He will tell you what time it is.